Season 2 of the ESPN Investigates podcast is now available. The Running Man tells the story of an obscure former Olympian and alleged serial sexual predator and how a 14-month ESPN investigation brought him out of the shadows. More than 50 men were physically abused and mentally manipulated by their quote-unquote coach for over 40 years, and they banded together decades later to find justice. Subscribe and listen now to ESPN Investigates wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, the Lowe Post.
Welcome to the Lowe Post podcast, where it is a Monday afternoon on the East Coast. We are 8 days removed from the Los Angeles Lakers winning their 17th NBA title, a phraseology I know my next guest really loves to hear. The Lakers with 17 NBA titles. So it's time to start talking about the offseason, because the offseason is here, and there is no one I'd rather talk trades, free agency, rumblings with than my old boss from The Ringer, from the Bill Simmons podcast, Mr. Bill Simmons. How are you?
It's 12 titles. It's not 17.
Yes, there we go. Right off the top.
Well, they count the 5 Minneapolis ones, one of which wasn't even an NBA title. It was like the ABL, or it was like a different league. Whatever. If they need to count titles that didn't happen in Los Angeles to make themselves feel better about the Celtics rivalry, that's fine. They can have it.
Are you nervous about next season? Because if they get 18, I don't know what Boston fans are going to do if they at least don't co-share the all-time number. I don't know what they're going to do.
All the Boston fans know the real number is 17. 17 titles won by the Boston Celtics in Boston, and there you go. We still have the title. Hey, put it this way. I said this on my podcast. If they're going to count the 5 Minneapolis titles, then why isn't George Mikan's jersey retired?
Is it not
Explain
retired?
that to me, Zach Lowe. Yeah.
I haven't paid attention to the jersey retire. They should retire it.
Yeah. That's my thing. Like, if you're going to recognize and embrace and, let's be honest, take this history that didn't happen until you got to Los Angeles, then embrace it. But, here's the case. Does OKC count the Seattle Supersonics 1979 title? If you're an OKC fan, you're like, well, we have one. We won in Seattle in 79. Would anyone say that in OKC? Does anyone feel like, man, remember when Gus Williams won us a title?
Enough.
Okay.
We can't talk about the offseason, which I cannot wait to talk about the offseason. I'm so excited. We first should probably talk about like when next season is going to start. What have you heard, Mr. Simmons? I know you talked about it towards the end of your pod last week. What do we got?
Yeah, I talked about it on the Sunday pod. I had thought, and I'm sure I heard the same stuff you'd heard, that they were really adamant about trying to get fans in the stands and were willing to push it to March, April if they had to, so there could be, better chance for a vaccine, all that stuff. I think what's starting to happen, and they're starting to talk to people this week, and they're going to talk to the networks, things like that, is they're starting to realize that this season is screwed to some degree, no matter when it starts, because even if they start in March, there's no guarantee they would be able to have a lot of people in the building anyway. What they really care about is the season after that, the 21-22 season, and preserving what that looks like.
That's the bounce back. That's the bounce back.
That's the bounce back year where you get the 100% of the bang for your buck, the whole thing. So thinking that, it makes sense if they started on Christmas, latest Martin Luther King weekend, and you had a shorter schedule, maybe it's 72 games, maybe it's 70, whatever. You got rid of the All-Star break, and you made that like a 5-month sprint. You did some stuff like I think they've learned from the bubble stuff that, if Denver comes to LA to play the Lakers and Clippers, but then has another Lakers game in the schedule, maybe just keep them in LA, bang out all of their at LA games at once versus having them come back twice. I think they've learned the travel thing was a little bit, maybe they're doing that wrong, and maybe there's ways to fix that. So you go 70, 72 games, no All-Star break. And let's say you start the latest Martin Luther King weekend. That's a 5-month sprint. You're done. End of June. Is that end of May, end of June?
If you're really going to do it all in 5 months, it's around that. Yeah. I mean, it's end of June. I mean, if you're doing it really everything in 5 months, that's when you're done.
And then 9 or 10 weeks for the playoffs and you're done. They don't want to go against football again. They got trounced with the ratings. I think the election cycle had something to do with it. I think There's a lot of factors that we don't have to go into, but they need to finish in time to start the next season at a normal thing. And maybe that's a shorter schedule. Maybe that starts in mid-November. But here's what we know. When the finals are in June and the offseason is in July, they own that part of the schedule. They own those 2 months. And the closer you get toward August, September, the more you're threatening that. And they need to get back to the balance of that. So I'm going to be really interested in following all the conversations over these next 8 to 10 days when their owners are talking to each other, when they're talking to the networks. How do we handle this 2021 season so that we don't compromise 21-22 at all? Because we need to make 100% of our money in 21-22.
Yeah, I was asked last week in a different venue, what's your prediction for the season? When does it start? What does it look like? And I said Martin Luther King Day, because I think waiting till March is the enemy of good situation where you wait so long hoping for fans and you get there and you're like, well, we're still not going to be able to have fans. What did we just blow all this time for? And in terms of fans, I do think they still want fans next season. I don't know if it's going to be, I think in some places it might be 2,000 or whatever capacity you deem safe. In some markets, it still might be no fans. I think they're just going to have to see whether the rapid testing is, see where the virus is. I think they want fans. And so I said Martin Luther King, fans, and exactly what you said about travel. I don't know how they get to 82. Maybe they don't. But I would expect something like if you play X percent of your games now against your own division, that's tripled next season or whatever the case may be, just to get the games in. And you figure the fans out as you go, and then you have a playoffs. And I agree with you. I think they do. It's not even good news. The only news that made me like a little bit happy to coming out of all this is when Adam Silver said before game 1 of the finals, I think we've learned that this idea that we should move from Christmas till August or whatever till September is probably not for us, and we need to get back to the old schedule. And I did a little silent on behalf of everyone who has kids. I did a little fist pump for my summer trips because those were all at grave risk, and now maybe they're at less grave risk.
I think the ideal scenario, which we've talked about really since we worked together at Grantland, is 70 or 72 games, and it starts third week in November. So you've gotten past the first 10 weeks of the NFL season at least. And then you do a 70-game sprint, and you're much smarter about travel, and you try to get the playoffs so that, let's say the finals goes all the way to the last week of June. And then you have the draft like July 2nd. And then you have your off season all the way through July. You still win all of June and all of July. And those have been the key months for the league. I mean, we've seen it just like at the Ringer with our podcast and website traffic. Like the off season in a lot of ways is as popular as the regular season.
Well, you know that I never want to see the numbers for anything. You remember?
I know.
I never want to see the numbers. But one of the things I know is that we could have Game 7 of the finals, LeBron and like Jordan comes out of retirement to play for the other team in Game 7 of the finals. I don't think my podcast previewing that game would do as many numbers as the podcast I did the day after Kawhi Leonard and Paul George went to the Clippers. That's still the most popular.
Right.
Like all I know is that podcast is number 1 of all the ones I've ever done, and I don't think it's close. And I bet numbers 2 to 10 are probably about off-season and trade stuff too.
Well, and then if you're the NBA, like baseball has declined in kind of a general day-to-day interest every year. This weekend, you saw Joe Buck, who announces baseball for Fox and also does football for them. They take him off Game 7 of Dodgers Braves. Winner goes to the World Series, and they put him on Week 6 Packers Bucks.
Well, Bill, I mean, this is why your small town podunk Boston Red Sox can't afford to pay Mookie Betts' salary.
This is going to get dark fast if we talk about that.
But I'm not even following it. I just know that I'm supposed to make fun of every Red Sox fan about Mookie Betts. I don't even know. I know he made some catches. That's all I know.
I think the NBA, all of this will eventually lead to a long-term good if the schedule is shorter, if they can really figure out that mid-November all the way through June thing. And honestly, like I think pot becomes legal in the next collective bargaining agreement, because that was another lesson we learned from this bubble. They weren't testing for pot. Could that have been one of the factors that quality play was better? Maybe. recovery?
Well, look, if you're gonna have force is strong because the players agree to it. If you're going to have players live in the bubble in Disney World for 3.5 months, got to make some allowances. Got to loosen some rules. And I'll tell you what else should be part of this discussion, Mr. Simmons, is you can take your victory lap because the play-in tournament should be a thing. And I think the NBA, I think it was already trending that way for a couple of years. And I think seeing Phoenix make a run at it, seeing Portland and Memphis, Portland having to win that last game against Brooklyn, and then the Memphis play. Like, I just think the buzz for that, we'll always remember Phoenix in the bubble because of the possibility of a play-in tournament. And I think that to me has always been a no-brainer. It's easy. It requires very little heavy lifting at the end of the regular season. So that's another, to add to this discussion, that's another thing that I think should happen.
Well, especially if you're going to shorten the schedule. It allows a team, let's say you lose Damian Lillard for the first 35 games of the year because he had some injury, and now he's back, and now you're fighting to get back in the playoffs anyway. It at least allows you not to have your season completely submarine. And the thing is, like, that Portland-Memphis game was really fun, that play-in game. I really enjoyed it. It felt like a playoff game. I think we learned a lot about a couple of the guys. Like for John Morant, that was an incredibly important game for him as a player. He had a bad first half and kind of figured it out and was a monster in the second half. But I'm all for like that kind of stuff. And you think like ultimately that was a completely meaningless game, right? Portland advances and gets demolished by the Lakers, but it was still fun and it was still a playoff thing. It was something to watch. It got people talking. And I think that 7-10, 8-9 play-in thing where basically you have to beat the higher seed twice is a really cool gimmick. I like it.
They've figured out a good way, a good method of doing that while still giving the 7 and 8 seeds. Now, I think even in this scenario, they discovered that there might be a year where the 7th seed should not be in the play-in tournament, that they're too good for the play-in tournament, as Dallas was this year. And so I think you build yourself the flexibility to say, okay, this year it's going to be 8, 9, and 10 or 8 to 11 or whatever it is. Because I do think if you get a scenario where 7 is 8 games better than 8 or something like
right.
that, I don't think it's fair to shoehorn that team who's way closer to 3rd than they are to 8th into a play-in tournament.
Yeah, it should be, depending on how long the schedule is going to be ultimately, it should be an 8-game difference, a 10-game difference, something like that. And if they can get a 10-game lead over the next team, that will also make teams like that, give them more stakes for the end of the season. To me, it's all about stakes for teams in that last third of the season, which perennially sucks, where you have 8 to 10 teams throwing away their seasons.
And to your point, they did that on the bottom end with you have to be within 4 games to make a play-in tournament. They did that at the bottom end with the East and with Washington not being able to make a play-in tournament. So they have built that in. All right, enough about that. Let's go to the offseason.
Yeah.
Because it's been a long time since we haven't had an offseason. And
a long time. It's been, 16, 17 months?
It's been a long time.
16 months.
We haven't had a trade in a long time. Long time since we've had a trade. I think this offseason promises to be pretty interesting despite the lack of huge names in free agency. And I think the reason it's interesting right off the bat is we have a weird draft where, according to my draftnik people, there's a clear top 3 and then a little bit of a drop-off. But at the same time, no one is like super jonesing to get into the top 3. And
right.
more uniquely than that, we have a team picking number 1 in Minnesota and a team picking number 2 in Golden State that to some degree would be willing to trade down. And that's very unusual that the top 2 teams in the draft would be willing to trade down. And it's triply unusual that one of those 2 teams is trying to win the NBA championship in the upcoming season, and that's Golden State. So I think any discussion of the offseason has to start with Golden State at the number 2 pick. We can talk about, as we go, what kind of intel we've heard on what they're willing to do, what they're not willing to do. But clearly they are going to investigate trading down from number 2. That's been all over the place. So Picasso of the trade machine, Picasso emeritus of the trade machine. I don't know what you are at this point. Emeritus should be built into your title somewhere. Give me your favorite, or we'll start wherever you want, but I would say give me your favorite Golden State trades, the second pick trade.
Well, one thing with this draft, which I love, normally the playoffs start, the finals end, and the draft's like 4 days later.
Boom.
And you just kind of have to, on the fly, get ready for it. This time, these teams have been preparing for the draft since like March.
They're legitimately bored. They're actually bored. The front office people are like, I just don't. There's nothing else I can do.
Like, how many more times can you look at Killian Hayes' game against Lithuania in the under-18 Classic? So you have, on the one hand, they're almost overwatching and over-evaluating all of these guys. But on the other hand, they can't interview them. They can't see them in person. They can't get like that person-to-person interaction that I think is really important for a lot of teams. So I think we could see some of the craziest picks, and for like somebody like Kevin O'Connor's mock draft versus where the guys will actually go. I think there's going to be more variance than ever. Not to mention it's like 2013, which nobody knows who the top pick is. Everybody has different guys in the top three. So then you have Golden State, who has really the only time I can think of a comparison to this was Miami in the Michael Beasley draft. When they were 2 years away from winning a title, they had traded Shaq, but they still had Dwayne Wade, and they still had the foundation of a potential championship team if they nailed the pick, right? So you have that draft, and they don't know what to do with two. They take Beasley, which they shouldn't have. That was a draft that had Westbrook and Kevin Love in it, I think. But just to have a team that can add a top three pick to a team that I think everybody feels like at least has to be considered a contender.
Well, it's when you really go back and look, like the Lakers had a chance like this in the 80s, the Celtics had a chance like this in the 80s. It's a really rare, precious thing to pick this high when you're still good. And that's why I've always thought it's not a no-brainer for me that they should trade the pick, because if you love a guy that's going to be there, you give yourself a chance to get the bridge player to the next era, which you almost never get in this kind of way when you're toward the top of the league. And they've got that chance now. Now, whether they like anybody at number two enough to do that or whatever, I don't know. But it is.
Well, I think what's weird for them, the superstar guys are the guys who people feel like the ceiling is potential superstar. Now, whether that'll happen, who the hell knows? But I think Edwards, the guard, and LaMelo Ball are the two that are like the ceiling guys. Those are two guys that make no sense at all for Golden State, like literally zero. So then you look at James Wiseman, who was going to be the number one pick heading into the draft, had this weird college career where he played like one game. On paper, the kind of guy they would need, but nobody's 100% sold on him. So I'm with you. It actually makes more sense for them to either trade back or make a big trade with the pick. And I think we've both come up with some fake ones. Well,
the simplest one is involving Wiseman, because you have a team sitting at third that really would like a center, and that's Charlotte. And so the easiest move up trade to make, or the one that is like requires the least mental gymnastics, is Charlotte giving you number 3 plus something to move up to number 2 or number 1, similar to the Boston Philly trade with Tatum and Fultz, because I think Charlotte would love a shot at Wiseman, and it just makes sense. You look at their roster. Is it as simple as like, could you get Miles Bridges plus number 3 for as the price for trading down one spot or something? I think that's a deal that, depending on what Charlotte wants, I think that's a deal that could make some sense. That's an easy one. That's almost too easy to be fun to make up.
So I think Wiseman, because I've seen him like 5, I've seen him 7 in mock drafts. I think he is 100% top 3. I'd be shocked if he didn't go top 3, because we've seen this. This happens in football and basketball. You have a cluster of basically too many of one type of player in this draft, and there's not nearly enough of guys like him. So somebody will always talk themselves, and like Charlotte can look at this and go, oh man, it'd be nice if he panned out and we had like an awesome rim runner.
And the two teams above them play some misdirection. They make Charlotte scared that he's not going to be there. Maybe Charlotte's fine with whoever the consolation prize is, but if they really want him and the price is Miles Bridges, then I think that's an easy discussion to start to have.
Well, what if Minnesota wants him?
Same thing, same kind of deal. Then you just trade up to 1 and you whatever Minnesota. But I think
Minnesota might just take him though, and I think my feeling is that he's the only guy Golden State would take at that spot. I have no inside info, and if he's not there at 2, they probably trade down.
Well, the reason I want to start with Golden State instead of Minnesota is because well, I mean, one team is objectively a little more interested in the other team, but if you're going to trade down from a pick this high, Golden State is in a position where they could at least talk themselves into a deal where they get veteran role players and some future assets to fill in a team that's already really good. If Minnesota is going to trade the number 1 pick, I would assume if it's not a deal like that one we just discussed with Charlotte, where you still get one of the guys you want in the draft, I would assume you're trading it for a stud because your roster is not devoid of talent because they have talent in Russell, but not talented enough in an absolutely loaded Western Conference. Like the Warriors, sure, they'd love to get Brad Beal for number 2. They're not going to, right? But the Wolves, they need to get a player of that caliber if you're going to trade it for a veteran. So I think the Warriors just have more optionality and are more fun to talk about. They'll have an easier time trading down if they're motivated to do it.
Well, one thing that's good with both of them, each of them have an important trade machine piece to put in the trade, right? Minnesota has James Johnson's expiring next year. He's going to opt in, $16.1 million. So if you combine that with, whoever, another $4 to $5 million contract that they have, and they have a couple of them like Jake Layman and people like that, you can now get somebody in that Oladipo salary range, right?
More than that, they also have 17.
Yep.
And so could you, what does James Johnson plus number 17 get you? I mean, I think that's another way they can go. But anyway, start at the top.
Right. So they have that. Golden State has even more because they have the 17.2 trade exception that expires basically right after the draft. They had to use some chicanery with that. Then they have the Wiggins contract, which is almost $30 million. So we just have to mention that. And then we have Minnesota's top 3 protected 2021 pick that they have that becomes unprotected in 2022. So it's funny. The easiest trade to me, if Golden State really wanted Wiseman and Minnesota's like, we're going to trade him to Charlotte unless you move up, Golden State just flips spots with Minnesota and changes the protections on that pick. Because Minnesota owes them top 3 2021, it's unprotected 2022. Maybe they say, all right, it's top 8 protected 2021. And in 2022, instead of unprotected, it's now top 5 protected. And we'll swap picks. Golden State moves up, they get Wiseman. Minnesota says, well, we're not trading on the pick, so you're going to get Wiseman, and we'll just take Edwards second. That seems logical to me.
That's not bad. I like it. And
Thanks.
in that case, you're the Warriors. You either pick one or you get one and see what you can get for the number 1 pick at the last minute under the wire.
But Zach Lowe, that trade's not fun. I have a couple fun ones for you.
Let's go.
Is Marcus Smart on the table?
I don't think Marcus Smart is like off the table and locked out of the dining room. I'm not sure he's on the table, but he's like in the vicinity of the table, like most NBA players.
So Golden State calls Boston and they say, we really want Marcus Smart. And we can fit him in our trade exception. We'll offer number 2 for Marcus Smart in the 14. What does Boston do? I'm on the record as saying they can never trade Marcus Smart. I love Marcus Smart. But
I do think
if you're the
Boston
Celtics, this is a chance now to get a potential multi-time All-Star player to team with Jalen and Tatum.
I think Boston should probably do that. My guess is Golden State would view that as selling low on number 2.
But here's the thing. People really like this draft from 8 to 17. And I know the Celtics do. But if you're Golden State, you could argue that's where you find the Bam Adebayo. That's where you find the Tyler Hero. That's where you find the Donovan Mitchell. Now we're in that range of the 14th pick. We've been studying this draft for 6 months. We add Marcus. Now we have a crunch time guy. Now we go crunch time with Draymond, Marcus, Curry, Thompson, and Wiggins. Defensively, I can switch on everything.
You do have to be a little careful about if you're keeping Wiggins and you have Draymond Green. The other guys have to be able to shoot. And Marcus Smart can now shoot, but can he shoot? Can he capital S shoot? No, he can't. He's in terms of is he scaring people when he shoots threes?
They're leaving him alone.
Sometimes he's scaring the Celtics, frankly, when he shoots threes. Some of the threes he takes. But that's the right deal model. Number 2, for a player who can help me win now, who's not old, plus a future asset, that's pretty good. Number 14.
If I was Boston, I would say no. I would say we'll do Marcus for the number 2, and Golden State would say no thanks, and then we're done.
Fair. The sense that other teams get from the Warriors is that right now, and again, it's misdirection time. It's misinformation time. Okay, so let's like all the piles of salt that you can muster, just remember that, is that they are aiming for the home run with number 2. Like they're not trading number 2. The sense other teams are getting, and again, could be misinformation, is that the Warriors are not trading number 2 for, what's Marcus Smart, a 5th starter on a championship team? A 4th starter on a championship team?
Yeah, but he's somebody that in the basketball that we just watched can be out there in big games.
I get it. I'm not saying I'm not saying your deal's a bad deal. I'm saying the sense that other teams are getting from the Warriors is that that's not good enough for number 2. That they're treating number 2 as if, like, people, when you hear number 2, people still think, well, Kevin Durant was number 2. John Morant was number 2. Look at all these guys you can get at number 2. This draft may not be like that, but
that's a mistake.
Still hear number 2, and they have these highfalutin. Is that how I say that word? Highfalutin visions in their head. I'll give you another. Can I give you a deal that's like that?
Yeah, let's go back and forth. Yeah.
Here's a deal that I liked that my initial intel was that the Warriors would not like. Okay. Number 2 to Sacramento for number 12, Nemanja Bjelica, Rashawn Holmes, and like a top 5 protected future Kings pick.
Oh, you always want those for the Kings.
Maybe I was going to say a Kings, except when the Celtics had it, then it didn't work out. So I get number 12, so a pick in that range you're talking about. I get a future pick of varying quality. Bjelica and Holmes, yeah, they're not household names. They may not even be like neighborhood names, but they're like good players who can help me try to win the championship next year. I thought that was a pretty decent, fair deal, like that at least both teams would have to think about. I think, again, that might be selling number 2 too low to the Warriors. What do you think of that? I thought that was pretty good.
I had almost the same trade. I had one wrinkle, though. I had Wiggins at number 2 for Buddy Hield, Holmes, and number 12.
The Wiggins piece is really hard for me because it's still a negative contract. It's not like we talk about these Wiggins deals like these teams that are getting him are talking themselves into Wiggins, like he's young, he's this. It's still, I think, a negative value contract.
Can you think of a better team for him than Sacramento, though? Just for being Wiggins? A tantalizing potential, but ultimately disappointing perennial all-star on a team filled with guys like that for the last 20 years?
I don't know if he's been on the Warriors long enough to have the Warriors sheen that Vivek Ranadive really wants in like a former Warrior that the Kings. He's not enough of it. He doesn't have the Warriors sheen quite yet. Like Harrison Barnes was swimming in the Warriors sheen.
True. You're only trading up to 2 if you feel like Anthony Edwards or LaMelo is actually going to be a legitimate star. And I don't know if Sacramento feels that way. This is my favorite dumb trade I've made up in at least 2 years. Andrew Wiggins in the number 2 with Poole to make the contracts work to Detroit for Blake Griffin and number 7.
I didn't even make a Detroit fake trade with number 7.
So Detroit moves up 5 spots. They get out of Griffin because, he's had 8 surgeries. But if you're Golden State, and I actually Googled Griffin to see how his knee progress was going. Apparently he's feeling great. His knees feels as good as it's been in some time. And his contract's up a year sooner than Wiggins. It's just more expensive. And that's kind of like the home run trade. Plus you're only moving down 5 spots. So you're still getting somebody you really like at 7. You're just not getting one of the top 3 dudes. But the Blake Griffin rolling the dice on, can you get 2 healthy years out of Blake? And if you do, what do you look like defensively and from a ball movement standpoint if you throw him into the mix now?
But then again, you're going all in on, well, you've gotten rid of Wiggins in that deal, so I take it back. As you see, you're going all in on closing games with like Draymond, Blake, Clay, Steph, and a wing or something, which is fine. I will say this. Enough people have asked me what I've heard about Blake Griffin and how he's looking. What am I hearing? This and that. That I think Detroit is going to have a market for him. I don't think it's going to be like strong. Like they're not getting 2 first-round picks or even a first-round pick unless they take back something onerous too. But I've had enough teams ask me about Blake Griffin that I think there's still interest in what he can do to help you win.
How old do you think he is?
I'm gonna, without checking basketball reference, I'm gonna say 31.
He's 31.
Hey!
So that was good. So 2018-19 season, he was 24.5 points a game.
All NBA.
7.5 rebounds, 5.5 assists, 46% field goal, 36% 3-point, 7 attempts. And his free throw attempts were 7.3, which I always look at. That's the real way you know if somebody like him has fallen off, if the free throw attempts just crater. But he was really good, and he hurt his knee. And then last year he was hurt. So the question is, did he hurt his knee to the point that he can't come back? Or is he actually potentially going to come back and be 90% of what he was 2 years ago? And if that's the case, and I'm only moving down 5 spots, and I'm shaving a year off the Wiggins deal with a higher Blake thing, I think I would do that if I was the Warriors. Now, if I'm the Pistons, I get out of the Blake deal, I have Wiggins, whatever, and I'm in the top 3 now, and I could potentially get Edwards and build my team around him and hope he's good.
I don't think that's, again, Blake Griffin's contract is only 2 more years. It's not a marathon. It's a year and then a player option, which he'll obviously pick up. Someone else pitched me with Utah, a non-involved executive, so a third-team executive pitched me. Do you think Utah would do Mike Conley, or Utah or Detroit would do Mike Conley for Blake Griffin and Derrick Rose? Or would Utah have to put something else in that deal to make it work for salary
I think
purposes?
they'd have to put picks in.
Yeah, it might be. The Conley contract is expiring, though. So I'm getting salary. I think you're right. They might have to put a pick. I don't think they would do that personally, but I just thought it was an interesting trade.
That's a good one. Yeah, I'm bullish on the Detroit should trade Blake Griffin thing because, as you said, 2 years left. So you're rolling the dice this year he's healthy. And whatever, next year he's an expiring, even if he's healthy, unhealthy, whatever. And it's a huge contract. And if you're the Warriors and you have Blake making $38 million in the last year, but it's an expiring, that has trade value as well with the Minnesota pick. You keep more of your options open.
You want me to give you another Warriors trade?
Yeah, I have another one too.
Number 2 and Wiggins. So here we're on the same page now. Wiggins is moving. Give Wiggins back to the team who drafted him. Cleveland for number 5, Andre Drummond. And maybe I can do a little bit of salary finagling that I get Jetty Osman too.
So you get Drummond, he's already opted in?
Yeah, he told Stu Gatz he's opting in, so I'm assuming he's going to opt in.
Stu Gatz is breaking news now?
He broke news like 2 months ago on
Is that Stu Gatz bomb?
Stupidity. The Warriors love a lob catching center. They love a lob catching center. You can already hear people talking them into themselves. Well, if he's going to try really hard on defense, if he is in a championship situation, this and that. It's not. I don't love it for either team, but that's usually a good sign.
Well, you talked about it in your pod last week. I talked about it with Brazil on my pod last week, same time. If you're Golden State, you have to look at what just happened with the Lakers, and you have to look at Jokic, and you have to think to yourself, those are 2 of the teams I need to go through, especially the Lakers. And if I'm not big enough, I'm going to get overpowered by Davis and LeBron, assuming those guys stay healthy. I don't think, the 2017 Warriors would dust whatever version of the Lakers next year, but the 2015 Warriors, if Bogut wasn't in there, would have had trouble. So I do think you have to think about a size thing. You can't have Draymond as your biggest guy in crunch time when you're going against Davis and LeBron. You're going to get annihilated. So I'm not a huge Drummond guy, and I think the free throw shooting is a real problem. I think he's a good stats, bad team guy. But he's a good character guy, and he's somebody who's never been in a really good basketball situation, right? Can you think of has Andre Drummond been on the right team? I don't know.
Well, this is why the Wiggins thing is such a tricky thing, right? Because I can hear Warriors fans saying, "Well, I'm trading the higher pick and a semi-tantalizing player that I've got under contract for several more years for a lower pick, number 5, and a center whose contract expires this season. why am I doing that? And that was my reasoning of putting Osman in the deal or some other asset in the deal. But also, again, it just depends on how you value Wiggins. Like there are some teams who would just like hard no on Wiggins. Like I don't even want it. I don't want the deal on my books.
I have a 3-teamer for you.
Oh God. At least it's not a 4-teamer. The 4-teamers are the ones that hurt my brain. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the Robert Covington trade exactly, like all the pieces. That I always have to refresh my memory on that one.
This one's easy to understand. Brooklyn gets Victor Oladipo.
Oh my God.
Indiana gets the 2nd pick in the draft. Golden State gets Jared Allen, Spencer Dinwiddie, and number 19.
So I've traded number 2 for Spencer Dinwiddie, Jared Allen, and the 19th pick.
Yeah.
I bet the Warriors don't do that.
It doesn't feel like quite enough. If Karis LeVert was in the Spencer Dinwiddie spot in that trade, is that changing?
See, and that's the thing that why don't we just talk about? Why don't we just have the Nets discussion now? Because the Nets are going to go. I don't know what exactly the Nets are going to do, but the Nets, I think it's no secret that they would like to sort of consolidate some of their assets to try to get a 3rd star, and we all know who the most obvious 3rd star is, and that's Bradley Beal. I don't think the Wizards are trading Bradley Beal right now. I'm not even sure the Wizards would love the Nets Godfather offer, which is LeVert plus Allen plus picks up the wazoo. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't.
It's not enough.
But I can see the Nets getting into several situations where they try to get piece X, maybe Drew Holiday, for instance, without including Karis LeVert, and the other team says, no, actually, we want LeVert. And the Nets say, well, we think LeVert is a potential all-star. We're saving him for like a Bradley Beal level trade. And apologies to Drew Holiday. This is the Nets talking. You don't raise to the level of Bradley Beal. I could see the Nets hitting that traffic jam over and over and over with every player who's not Bradley Beal, basically.
So you think Jared Allen, LeVert, and number 19 is too much for Victor Oladipo? Because I would say it is.
Oh, absolutely. We can talk about Oladipo now too. Like, I don't even know how you trade for Victor Oladipo right now. That's not to say I wouldn't think about trading for him. I don't know how you value him after what we've seen
last year of his
injury.
Contract. Yeah, and coming off the injury.
Yeah, and he's coming up for a new deal. I just don't know how I'm supposed to think about him, and I'm certainly not giving up my best trade assets to get him right now, given that he was already not playing at the same All NBA level before he had what is a very traumatic injury. And then last year, I think, in fairness to Victor, you just have to throw in the dustbin of history because he had just come back, then the season stopped, and he's off for 4 months. Then he tries to come back again. Like, I'm not sure how much you can read into that, but I'm not backing up the Brinks truck for Victor Oladipo.
So Jared Allen, Spencer Dinwiddie in 19 actually is kind of fair value for whatever Oladipo is as an asset right now, with the year left in his deal when we haven't seen him play at a really high level for 2 years. I think Brooklyn is going to move Jared Allen because KD and Kyrie run that team, as we know, and DeAndre's their guy, and they're going to want DeAndre to be out there with them. And Jared Allen is better than DeAndre, and it's a conundrum because Jared Allen is just a more valuable basketball player by every metric and the eye test.
See, I have been saying forever that they need to start Jared Allen. They need to invest in Jared Allen. I think in the last 2 months of the last season, excluding DJ didn't go to the bubble. I think in the last 2 months of last season, pre-stoppage, Jordan was actually a little better than Jared Allen, and it had become a little bit underrated. Now, I don't know how real that was, but I like Jared Allen better, certainly as a player I'd invest in. The Nets are also over the tax by a lot if they re-sign Joe Harris. And I've got news for the Nets. They are going to have competition for Joe Harris. These teams with cap room all view Joe as a potential very good fit on the floor and a good culture guy. I think the Nets are going to have to...
too, right? Joe Harris and Bertans are the two guys who will make more money than people are prepared
I think Harris may have even more of a market just because teams trust his defense more. He's more sort of positionally fluid on defense. I think the Nets are going to have to pay like $15 million a year to keep Joe Harris.
Agree. By the way, I would do that in a second because he can play in crunch time for me in Game 7.
Well, and the Nets need people who don't need the ball. They need guys who are willing to play off the ball and all of that.
Well, don't you think, Zach, like what we saw from Duncan Robinson what we've seen, these guys who the spacing they create because teams are so scared of the 3-point threat. It's like what Brad Stevens told KOC once, that Kyle Korver might average 13 a game, but we have to defend him like he averages 30. Those guys are kind of the great inefficiency right now, but I think teams have figured out that it's not an inefficiency, that they're actually worth 15 to 16 million.
I was talking to someone last week in the league, and I said, I know that there were games where Duncan Robinson, was 2 for 7 from 3, or took 3 shots in a game, and he got picked on defensively a little bit. I think he made money in the playoffs overall. And
oh yeah.
And it's not even that he made 7 threes in a finals game, although it's partly that. He just runs so hard, so constantly, and in such unpredictable patterns that he's just a problem all the time. Even if he only gets 4 shots, and he's mastered the handoff, 1 dribble, pass to Bam, which is all he's got to do. 1 dribble, pass. That's it. He doesn't have to do 2 dribbles or 3 dribbles. And I think he made himself money but to your point, you have to be relentless like that. If you're a guy who is maybe going to be a liability on defense and is really a shooter at heart, you can't be running at 75% speed. You can't be, I did my first cut, I didn't get the ball, I fade out of the play. You got to be constant like he is. And Joe Harris is like that too.
I thought it was telling game 5, the game when Markieff Morris threw the ball out of bounds, that last play. Miami put Duncan Robinson. Spo had him in for that defensive possession because he trusted him just as a high IQ guy. It's obviously him guarding LeBron or getting switched on LeBron. Is that what you'd want? But he trusted he would be in the right spot. And I just think those guys are really hard to find. I think we've pigeonholed them unfairly. Not we, but some people have, where it's like they think of them as like a Kyle Korver type, right? Because it's white guy, good shooter, can't leave him alone. Those guys are just better all around players than that. And I think with Robinson and Harris, they have room to grow. I thought Harris, the fact that he was on the World Championships team, that was pretty important. Like he was able to hang with those guys. So I'm with you. I think he's 15 to 16 a year minimum.
I'll give you a team I'm keeping an eye on with Victor Oladipo. You ready?
Yeah.
Milwaukee.
Oh.
Just keeping my eye on him. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm going to say. Keep my eye on him.
I have one more trade, just quickly.
Okay.
This would require Golden State taking on a crap load of money. But Wiggins, Pascal, Poole, and number 2 to Orlando for Aaron Gordon and Evan Fournier and the 15th pick. And they could absorb Fournier into their trade exception. And they're basically taking on an extra $15 million. They're dropping down from 2 to 15. If you're Orlando, it's like, where are we going if we're Orlando? It's like, what are we?
So my notes for Orlando, it literally just says load of trades with Orlando. I didn't even have a specific one. Like, because you could have Wiggins, you could not have Wiggins, but whether it's Golden State or not, I do think for sure teams are going to sniff around what's available in Orlando. I haven't talked to Jeff Weltman or John Hammond, so do not take this as reported information. But I just do feel like the Magic need to have a come to Jesus moment where it's like, we just can't be the 8th seed every year. And we've now gone to the playoffs 3 times and Fournier has been awful every time. Aaron Gordon, I think the problem though is that I think they're selling low on Fournier, who has a player option anyway for next season, assuming he opts in, and is selling low on Gordon. I've talked to a few teams in the last 2 days who a year ago were really high on Gordon and are now less high on Gordon. But I do agree that Orlando has some interesting pieces, and I would throw Vucevic in there too. Like, I think teams will call about him as a shooting 5. So you could make any number of Warriors deals centered on 2 and 15 with Orlando's 15th pick. You could make any number of them, and they're all interesting to talk about, but there's like a dozen permutations.
One thing I liked about that trade, because if you take the Fournier Gordon money and you flip it into Wiggins, you're saving $10 million. You could spend that on free agents. So the final trade wouldn't be the actual trade. The interesting thing to me, Gordon's like $1.5 million higher than the Warriors trade exception. And if the salary worked and they could just absorb his contract, that to me is the most logical of all the trades. If they could just do the number 2 for Aaron Gordon straight up, no other contracts, no salaries, whatever. But unfortunately, he's like $2 million higher. I'm with you though. Orlando cannot stick with the team they have. Then it's like Isaac, he's out next year, I would assume. The Mo Bamba thing, like if they offered Mo Bamba to the Celtics for the number 14 pick, I think the Celtics would say no. Think about that. They liked him in that draft 2 years ago.
My gut reaction is they would say no, in part because if I'm Danny Ainge, I'm saying, well, why isn't Robert Williams just better than, well, like, why don't I already have a better young center already? Like, I think I do.
I think they would offer 26 and 30 and be like, is that good enough? I mean, Mo Bamba was like the 6th pick, but I don't think we've seen anything that makes me
You said you would do number 2 straight up for Aaron Gordon if you were the Warriors?
If he was making $17 million a year and I had him under contract for a couple of years, I think I would.
I don't think they would do that. I don't think they would do that.
So do I like Aaron Gordon more than you?
I think the bloom is off the rose with Aaron Gordon.
Interesting. Okay.
League wide. I'm like 4 years into begging Aaron Gordon to figure out who he is as a player unsuccessfully, because I do think I do think the optimized version of Aaron Gordon, which is please watch all the Draymond Green film and try to be your version of this guy, is a player that can be on the floor in Game 7 of the NBA Finals and help you win. But we just haven't seen that. We haven't seen that guy.
Yeah, he's playing with Vucevic. Did I say it right? Vucevic?
No, but I've given
what is
that
Vucevic?
One was good. That you got it that time.
I think his destiny is in that Draymond Green, like a better version of Robert Covington trying to play small ball 5 on Houston, where that should be who he is for a team. I don't know what team it is,
but I do think Orlando's there. I do think this is unreported. My gut is that they're there, and part of it is that the timing and contracts are going to make these decisions for them. So Evan Fournier has a player option for $17 million next year, right? I can see Evan Fournier's agent going to the Magic and saying, "Hey, you know what? I'd love an extension. How about we opt in and put a 3-year, $60 million thing on top of it?" To which I'm saying, no, thank you.
No, thanks. Thanks anyway.
Go ahead and opt in if you want, or opt out if you think you have a better deal than $17 million, whatever. And so time is making these decisions for them on Fournier. Gordon actually only has 2 years left on a deal that is declining in salary, which is interesting.
Our favorite out of all the ones we mentioned, just from a fun standpoint, would be if the Warriors, some sort of trade with Detroit where they end up with Blake Griffin.
That's crazy time. That's fun, crazy time. I have a couple more. Can I give you a couple more?
Yeah, go.
Number 2 to the Spurs for number 11, Rudy Gay and Keldon Johnson. And maybe I got to get something else too.
It's so funny. We kicked the same tires with the Spurs, and I just wasn't enchanted with anybody for them
Rudy
to get
Gay
back.
Plus Derek White is a little bit more expensive than their trade exception, so that one doesn't work unless you start throwing other pieces into the deal.
I mean, at that point, I would just rather roll the dice with Wiseman, knowing I could trade him in 4 months, versus like
I don't.
I need to get somebody. If I'm trading this pick, if I'm Golden State, I need to get somebody who's playing crunch time for me in a Game 7 against the Lakers.
Okay,
if I can't get that, I'm not doing it.
Number 2 to Chicago for number 4 and pick them between Lauri Markkanen and Wendell Carter Jr.
So I looked at, I think that's too much for Chicago.
I don't think the Bulls are. I don't think the Bulls are paying that. When I stumbled upon that and started surveying people around the league, my talking it through with them was that's a lot to pay to move up 2 spots unless you just love somebody, in which case, but I don't think Chicago loves somebody. I think actually I've had a lot of teams tell me I'd love to be in Chicago's spot because I get my pick of whoever I want below those top 3. And if someone falls to me because someone does something crazy, then great.
Rousseau and I were texting last week. I was like, I like the idea of Markkanen for the 2. And we kind of got excited about that because I'm all in on, I want to see Markkanen on a different team. The problem is you've already gone through a couple years of his rookie deal and you're going to have to pay him sooner. If they could get Carter for the 2, first of all, I don't know why Chicago would do that because I like Carter more than anybody in that top 3.
I don't think they would.
But if the Warriors could get that, and they gave, maybe you offer Jerry Reinsdorf some money. We know he loves saving money every year. Maybe they offer him number 2 and $3 million and some stock in some Joe Lacob company that he invested in or something. I like the idea of Carter though. I think he's really good. And the Bulls to me are a team that I just don't know what to make of their talent because they were all in the worst possible situation. The Jim Boylan thing was a catastrophe. You build a team around Zach LaVine, who's the biggest good stats, bad record guy in the league. And I don't, if you're Wendell Carter, would you be like, man, that was a really cool 2 years. I learned a lot. You're in the same spot you're in 2 years ago.
Well, I think you just outlined why the Bulls would be hesitant to make that kind of trade is that I think they believe I want to see what these guys can do under Billy Donovan because what we saw last year from Wendell Carter Jr. when he just wouldn't even look at the rim, he was so discouraged from shooting and playing offense, was like a shade of himself. And I think they have faith that, okay, let's get a fresh coach in here. Let's do something different. And this guy's going to look way better than he did last year.
Can I give you a trade I don't think either team would make?
Those are often the best trades.
Porzingis.
Oh boy.
For Wiggins, number 2, and that other Minnesota pick. I think both teams say no. For different reasons.
Well,
because if you're Golden State, you're like, we're trading everything for this guy who might not be able to stay in the court. And if you're Dallas, you're saying, if Porzingis is healthy, Luka's the MVP favorite next year, and we add one more piece, we could actually compete for the title next year. We can't go backwards. So I think it's a double no.
Wow.
Yeah, good one, right? The rare double no.
Well, I think Dallas is one of the most interesting teams in the league for the next year and a half because
they could win the title if they make 2 good moves.
Well, I thought of them today. I was making up some fake Rudy Gobert trades just for fun because he has a supermax.
Let's go.
He has a supermax, eligibility coming up that we'll see what happens. But to me, Dallas is. They are a little short on cap room for Giannis in the summer of 2021, but they can get there easily because they got a million good contracts they can move. That is, to me, that is the one that if I am one of the other 29 teams in the league, I do not want to see that happen because Luka and Giannis is their own version of LeBron and Anthony Davis. Like that, I think that's the role where Giannis can win championships, where he's not LeBron. Luka is LeBron in the sense of he has the keys to the offense. And Giannis is yes, he gets to run pick and roll. He gets to post up. He gets the ball some, but he also screens and dives, and he's all over the place on defense, and he runs the offense when Luka rests and all this. To me, that's the one where I have nightmares if I'm one of the other teams in the league.
Couldn't agree more. I know we both talked about it on our podcast. If I'm Giannis, if I'm leaving Milwaukee, I'm going to Dallas.
It's just a matter of.
Here's the thing: we both think Luka has a chance to be one of the 6 or 7 best players of all time. If he doesn't get hurt and if he continues on the pace he's on, he has the chance to be this generation superstar, the post LeBron generation. Who's going to be the guy who owns that 15-year stretch? Luka's by far the best chance. And if Giannis teams up with him and they grow old together in Dallas and Dallas spends a load of money for them, that's the scenario that scares everybody.
And I'm not even sure I need Porzingis in that scenario to be my starting 5 or whatever he's going to be spacing the floor for those guys. I'm not sure that it's not better for me to flip Porzingis into a few different things.
Well, if Giannis decided he wanted to go there now, which it sounds like a crappy thing to do, but we've seen how many times have we seen superstars leverage situations? We just saw it with Anthony Davis. He's like, I want to go to the Lakers. He had 2 years left on his deal. Guess what? Ended up on the Lakers. If Giannis is just like, I've made my decision, I'm going to Dallas in a year, we could either facilitate that now or it'll just happen a year from now. Then there's some sort of Porzingis Giannis thing. But
yeah, I mean, look, all the intel I've gotten for years now is Giannis is not going to do that with Dallas or any other team.
I don't think he will either.
And the Bucks, as a result, are going to take it to the end as the Thunder did with Durant. And without, if he doesn't sign the Supermax, so you just live in this world all year. If he doesn't sign the Supermax and he doesn't say I'm leaving, then the Bucks are not trading him. And they're going to try to win the championship and convince him to stay. Or get to the finals and convince him to stay. Get to the finals and make a trade that somehow convince him to stay. I think they take it to the end, and that only changes if Giannis tells them now, I want to go to this place, or I'm not re-signing, which I don't think will happen. Nor do I think I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. Right, and again, nobody knows these things for a fact. I can't say that I know what's going to happen, but if you force me to bet, I don't think he's signing the Supermax this offseason.
I would say the odds are like 5-1. It's a bad move. You have
it's rarely a bad move to lock in like $250.
He's getting it anyway. We saw Durant sign a max contract when he had a torn Achilles. You're getting the contract either way, unless something really, really tragic happened to you. It's going to happen. Milwaukee, I think, is in a really dangerous position. We don't have to make up Milwaukee trades, but it's very similar to the Cavs heading into that 2009-2010 season, when they're just taking money and bad contracts and mortgaging everything to try to make LeBron happy to try to win a title. And you go back and you look at the trades they made those last couple of years, and they were really bad. They were really bad transactions that screwed them completely when he left. I don't think Milwaukee wants to do that, but I do think I'd be shocked if Eric Bledsoe was on that team next year.
I would be very surprised if they didn't do something big-ish, medium-sized, whatever you consider that kind of trade, Bledsoe and some other stuff for X. I would be very surprised if they didn't do something like that.
Chris Paul would be the disaster trade for them, because now you're all in, and if Giannis leaves in a year, now you have Chris Paul for 2 more years after that. And
I think only 1 more year, right? Doesn't he only have 2 years left on his deal? No, you're right. I think you might be right. Let me check.
He's got the player option for the third
right.
year, which means he could just lock it in. I have one Minnesota trade for you that I thought was fun.
Okay, shoot.
Johnson and Layman, just to make the contracts work, to Utah with the number 1 pick for Rudy Gobert in 23.
First of all, CP only has this year and next year left on his deal. So just FYI. So number 1, and give me the trade again.
Number 1 in the Johnson Layman contracts to Utah for Rudy Gobert in 23.
I don't think either team is doing that.
You don't think Minnesota's doing that?
I think if I'm Minnesota, I say Towns is a center. Full stop. I don't want to pair him with Rudy Gobert. And Utah, I get the number 1 pick. That's a big deal. And
with Donovan Mitchell, and I'm in a conference that I have no chance of actually winning for the next 2 years.
And I get to reorient around Donovan's timeline.
Yeah.
Look, the Gobert thing.
I think they're trading him.
He's eligible. I don't know what they're going to do, because he's eligible for a Supermax. I don't think that he's going to get that, and I think Utah would be very worried about giving him that kind of contract.
I don't see that happening.
I had trouble, honestly, unless so your trade presumes the Jazz just don't really care about next season.
My trade presumes the Jazz are like, we've hit a wall.
That
we cannot win the title with this team. We have no way of making this team better.
Your trade has no answer to the question, and I'm not saying that makes it a bad trade. I'm just saying it has no answer to the question is, who is the starting center for the Utah Jazz next season? You've decided, I don't care. This trade is too good. I'm making it.
I'd take James Wiseman.
Okay, that's my starting center then. There you go.
Yeah. I'm hoping he's good.
That's why I did not think of this Gobert trade. I did not think of Gobert for number 1. Because that's the problem I kept having with my fake Gobert trades is it's leaving the Utah Jazz, a team that, yes, has Donovan Mitchell, but also has some older guys that we just spent a lot of money on, Joe Ingles and Bogdanovic. It's leaving them without a starting center. I kept running into this roadblock of who's my starting center next year, because I thought of some okay Gobert trades, because I just think it's a big question hanging over the offseason. And Utah is one of those teams where it's like, we need to make another move to get into the conversation, or we're just where we're at.
One other trade I had with this one was actually the most logical one. It's Minnesota and Charlotte swapping picks. James Johnson goes to Charlotte. Rozier comes back to Minnesota. He's got 2 years left. He actually had like kind of a quietly good year, statistically at least last year. You can play him with D'Angelo. Well. He can guard the other team's best guard. You only have him for 2 years. You end up with whoever you want to end up with anyway at number 3. And then if you're Charlotte, you get your guy if that's your guy.
I do think Rozier is an under-the-radar sneaky trade piece this summer. If they could find the right deal, I think that's a. If you like Terry Rozier, there are a bunch of guys that's like, if you like them, it's worth some phone calls. Like if you like, I know a lot of teams are going to call the Spurs about Derek White, for instance, because there's this sense that, there's limited interest, I think, at DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge. And then there's the sense that the Spurs have all these young guards and wings, and they're going to eventually trade one of them. And maybe I'll call about Derek White and see if I can get him. Rozier is sort of like that, more expensive, obviously. I didn't find a Gobert trade that I liked. I really didn't.
What do the Warriors say if Utah calls them and says, we'll give you Gobert for Wiggins and 2? I think they hang up.
I don't know. That's a good one.
Because Golden State still has to reconcile with this whole how do we beat the Lakers thing next year.
My favorite, I mean, the obvious Gobert one is Brooklyn. Because it's got to be a team, if you're going to pay him, it's got to be a team that's in a rush to do something now. It's in a rush to do some damage now. And Brooklyn has the pieces. I just for some reason, I don't see it. Don't see it happening.
What about Gobert for Miles Turner and Aaron Holiday?
It's not bad, except, well, you know why? I'll take it back. You know why I crossed Indiana off my list? Because I don't know that I want to get back into a Sabonis as a fake power forward on defense.
You want him at 5. Yeah, that's fair.
Dallas I thought about, but ultimately I'm saving my ammo for other stuff if I'm Dallas. The one that I really like and I think has a chance to have an interesting offseason is I tried to build some deals around sending Harrison Barnes and a lot of other stuff to Utah for Gobert. Because Sacramento is going to try to make the playoffs next year, and they have a huge hole at center unless they want to play. I mean, Holmes is all right, but so I shouldn't say a huge hole, but maybe they want to play Bagley at 5 a little bit, which I think is something they should investigate. But I thought that was a little interesting. I couldn't find a good deal.
Buddy Hield can't be in that deal. Because his contract kicks in where it's like $24 million a year after the draft.
He could. Lots of Buddy Hield trade buzz, as you know. Lots of Buddy Hield trade buzz. A lot of people are proposing the Horford for Buddy Hield deal construction for this reason, thinking that Sacramento will make a win now move for a big man. To me, all these Horford trades I'm being pitched, I get that Al Horford is a much better player than he appeared last season in that situation in Philly. But I've had, what about Horford for Gallinari in a sign-in trade? What about Horford for Gordon Hayward? What about Horford for Buddy Hield? And my response is every time, well, what else am I getting for taking on Al Horford? Like, why am I bending? Why am I doing this deal for? To me, I got to get a lot of stuff.
I also like Buddy Hield, and he's somebody. If I was a GM, I'd be trying to get. And I was thinking about him for the Celtics actually, because they have Hayward as an expiring, and if they were just like, this thing's jinxed, it's never going to happen, he's leaving in a year. Could we offer him with the 14th? Pick to Sacramento for Buddy Hield, like that. Those are basically the foundation of the trade. Sacramento gets out of the Buddy Hield contract because he's unhappy and was unhappy all last year. They get another asset. The Celtics get something for this Hayward thing where he's just going to leave in a year, and another shooter, and that's something.
So let's just call this our interesting teams we haven't talked about yet, and you can pick who we talk about.
Okay.
Phoenix, Atlanta, Denver, Toronto. Pick one. I don't care which one.
I'd like to start with Phoenix because I think they're frisky right now.
Yes. Me too.
I think they're covered in body oil. They've been doing some reps out in the trade machine deck, trying to get people's attention. Maybe having a daiquiri. Just trying to make conversation. How about this? I'm just gonna go to the big one right now. Chris Paul for Ricky Rubio and Kelly
They are my
Oubre.
sneaky favorite Chris Paul team. We did not discuss this in advance.
No. It actually works under the cap. OKC would get 2 more years of Rubio. Oubre's an expiring. They could spin him off if they want. I actually think he has value as a wing and as an expiring deal, making $15 million a year.
And I also think he's a guy who falls into the Derek White bucket that I'm calling about if I'm another team. If I'm high on him, I look at the pieces there and I look at the fact that they went 8-0 in the bubble. They're going to be under pressure to win next season. Can I pluck him somehow in some win now trade for Phoenix? He's a name that I think makes a lot of sense to mention.
And Phoenix can replace his minutes because Bridges was pretty good last year.
Bridges is good. Cam Johnson is good. And depending on what I'm getting, I think they also make a lot. I think they have an obvious, not obvious, but I think, if they don't bring back Saric, I think that Gallinari makes some sense there as a win now move. In which case,
I'm out on Gallinari.
Yours out.
His bubble performance was reprehensible. I'm out.
Okay.
I'm out. He lost me. I was a longtime defender. I'm out. Chris Paul to Phoenix though. In the end,
I think that's too aggressive for Phoenix, depending on what else is in there besides Oubre that makes it worth Oklahoma City's while. It's a little aggressive, but
I think that top 3 though, because you and I both loved how Ayton played after his suspension. Booker looks like he's ready to become a superstar. And now you have Paul running the show. You have shooters. You still have your free agent exception or your free agent, whatever. What is it? $9 million for the mid-level?
Yeah.
To get one other person. And I don't know. I kind of like that team. It's a good one.
I think we're onto something. I think they're going to be hunting around for stuff. I'm glad we brought them up.
What else would they do though? Because Ayton and Booker are untouchable. So basically, it's that Rubio Oubre combo for a bigger star is the move.
Yeah.
There.
Plus, whatever draft equity you want to invest in it, depending on who the guy is.
Let me know what you think of this trade. Spencer Dinwiddie straight up for Patrick Beverley.
Ooh. I see. I kind of like that I kind of like that for the Clippers. I'm trying to think how I feel about it for the Nets. That's an interesting trade.
Dinwiddie's got a year left. Because we know, let's be honest, if we're looking at the Clippers, Beverly, Harrell, Lou Williams, I would say the over-under on those 3 guys coming back is 2. And you could talk me into all 3 of those guys not being back. I don't know how they bring Harrell back at $15 million a year. That would be absolute salary cap suicide. They can't do that. Beverly for $12 million a year, somebody could talk themselves into him. And then the Lou Williams piece. How many terrible postseasons can Lou Williams have before we just give up on him? I don't care.
Well, if I get Dinwiddie, I satisfy my need for someone who can get into the paint off the dribble a little bit more decisively than Kawhi does. Although Kawhi can obviously get there decisively when he wants to. I've said all year I think they need a little zip, a little north-south zip, and Lou was their guy to do that. Dinwiddie. I also just think I think Patrick Beverley is really good. I think the Clippers can maintain a really good defense without Patrick Beverley as long as Kawhi and PG are on the team and they're well coached. I don't fear giving up Patrick Beverley's defense.
All right, you're Mark Cuban. I'm Ballmer. Calling to check in. Hey, just between us, never to be repeated. You wouldn't trade Porzingis for Paul George, right? What do you say?
Well, I'm Mark Cuban in this scenario.
You're Mark Cuban. Ballmer's called you out of the blue. He's kind of feeling you out for Porzingis for Paul George straight up.
I love Paul George. I love Pandemic P. Way Off P. Those nicknames are funny. I'm so nervous about Porzingis' health now that I think that deal is worth looking into for Dallas, and I bet the Clippers wouldn't do it. I think it's more likely the Clippers extend Paul George this summer than it is that they trade him. I think it's very unlikely they trade him. If I'm Paul George's agent, I'm walking into Ballmer's office and saying, you don't want both of us, both Paul and Kawhi, hanging out on expiring contracts all year long. Like, that's a nightmare. Give me 2 more years now. You locked me in. It's going to make Kawhi feel better. It's going to make Paul George feel better and play better. Like, I'm leveraging that for all it's worth if I'm Paul George's agent.
Is there any sort of Embiid Paul George possibility?
Oh my God. This is... No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
I just don't know what Philly does heading into this season with a broken roster, but a ton of assets. Oh, 2 big assets, I guess.
I don't know. Like,
wow, you now you officially look like you've been through the ringer. No pun intended.
Yeah,
that one broke you. I think I broke your brain.
That hurt me a little bit. I don't know what Philly does either, because people keep pitching me, like I said, Gallinari to Philly, and I'm like, all right, so let's just say I flip Horford for Gallinari. Let's say I get so fortunate that I'm able to do that. I still have Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris, Danilo Gallinari, who are all positionally 4s in some respects anyway, although Ben Simmons is really just a Ben Simmons. And Embiid, who's like, it doesn't really solve my need for like some guards who can do stuff. Like, I don't, anyway.
The best thing they could do is take Richardson and try to get like the Spencer Dinwiddie, some sort of point guard back, Terry Rozier, somebody who could at least guard other teams' point guards and isn't just another 6'8" guy who doesn't know where to go on a half court offense. And let's be honest, like, all due respect to Doc, won the 2008 title. I'm not sold he's the brain surgeon to fix this tumor of a Philly offense, because I don't think anybody has trotted out more clogged toilet offenses over the years than Doc.
Well, the irony of Philly hiring Doc a year after they let JJ Redick go is amusing to me, because Doc loves to play with, and Shamet too. I mean, like, it's like Doc loves to play with that kind of piece, and he's used it very effectively to unclog some so-so spacing.
Well, I wonder if JJ could be in play for them too.
Yeah, I tried to create some New Orleans deals with the Warriors. Let's just rapid fire through these other couple of teams that I brought up. Atlanta I brought up because I think the 6th pick is in play if anybody offers them a veteran who could help their team. I also think John Collins is obviously worth monitoring. Denver.
Atlanta is the guy who had Apple stock in 1985, and somebody offered them a pretty cool deal, just some cash up front, and they sold it, and they could have been cajillionaires.
Is this about Luka?
Yeah.
Is that about
and it's
Luka?
just awkward to make eye contact with them, because it's like, oh yeah, you guys could have Luka. And it's like, cool, so we might do some stuff with the 6th pick. It's like, cool, you passed up a generational superstar. He might be one of the 7 best players of all time. Cool.
Denver, because I think they will have an interesting decision to make whether they revisit the Drew Holiday thing. What
do you do with Porter? I would say you'd be selling high on Porter right now as an asset.
My assumption is that Porter played his way off the table for Drew Holiday. That Denver would not trade him for Drew Holiday.
If you think you can win the title, you have to trade Porter this offseason and get an awesome third guy.
You don't have long term. You don't have faith in him long term.
I don't know. I have some questions about, would he be happy being the 3rd best guy in the Nuggets? I have some questions about his health and the fact that all these teams are terrified of him heading into that draft because of his medicals. You could argue you're selling high with him. That to me was the obvious Bradley Beal trade. I don't know if it's quite enough. They don't have that second awesome pick to throw in, but it at least gets a conversation going. If I was Washington, there's other deals I would think about, but if we're talking Drew Holiday and it's Gary Harris and Porter for Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday still, what is he, like 31? I don't know.
I think he's 29.
Because your worst case scenario is you keep Porter. You don't. I'm going to say he's 31. Holiday.
Drew 30? Holiday is 30. Split the difference.
Your worst case scenario, if you keep Porter, is he comes out like he's cover of a couple magazines. He's feeling himself a little bit. This is going to be my year. And it's like, we have our team. We're the Jokic Murray team. You're going to have to fit in. That is our infrastructure. And I would worry about him wanting to be like the guy, because I think that's a real concern. I think he's that talented, you know?
It's an interesting.
When he said the stuff about the shots in the playoffs, that was the first time I was like, oh, I wonder if this is going to last.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair concern, and it is interesting that Denver has to think about. Yeah, we made the conference finals, but the West is just getting better and better every year. Do we need to upgrade again? And Drew Holiday is a great third banana for their team. He's not going to take shots from Murray and Jokic. He's going to play great defense, and I do think they need to really prioritize. Depending on who goes out in the trade, I think defense has to be like Zach LaVine has been rumored to Denver a lot in the past. I think, and I just think I think offensively he'd be a great fit there. You take the ball out of his hands, you turn him into a roving, cutting menace on the baseline, catch and shoot threes. But defensively, depending on who's there, there's just a lot of holes there.
If I'm Denver, I'm looking at the West, and I have a chance to make the finals because I have Jokic and Murray. But my biggest flaw is that I can't defend LeBron, I can't defend Luka, and I can't defend a healthy Kawhi if he's ever healthy again.
Well, that's why Jeremy Grant's coming back there for sure. They're gonna. I would be shocked if they don't pay whatever it takes to keep Jeremy Grant.
All right, I'm glad you brought this up because I really like Jeremy Grant. I don't think he's that good of a defender. I would not describe him as a lockdown defender. If anything, like I think he's like LeBron just toyed with him. And now, granted, LeBron is one of the two best players of all time, but he had no chance. And I think Luka would toy with him too. And it's like, if you're going to pay him $15 million a year, but he can't lock people down or at least really make them work for their points, then why am I paying him $15 million a year? I didn't see it in the playoffs from him.
He's just decent, and his rebounding numbers are like legitimately alarming. Like his rebounding numbers are really, really bad, and I do think they're onto something there. I just, given his ability to play the four and Millsap kind of aging out of starter, although he was huge for them in a couple of games against the Clippers, I think they'll bring back Jeremy Grant. Although again, I do think some of these teams with cap room, depending on what happens with some of their other players, will have big interest in Jeremy Grant. He's a hot name right now.
You know who's the most intriguing random free agent to me? Because it's not, let's be honest, not a great free agent class, right? It's a lot of guys are going to opt in, and we don't have signature dudes. I'm really interested to see where Ibaka goes, because that's a guy who's made a lot of money. Now, granted, you could always use more money, but he's made a lot of money. He's been in good situations. He got to win a title already, and is, by all accounts, one of the best teammates. A great guy. I know you and I have both spent time with him. He's the kind of guy I could see talking himself into, I'm going to go to Golden State and I'll take a little less and it'll be worth it. A little like where Iguodala was, in the middle part of last decade. But I was so impressed with him in that Toronto Celtics series. And Nick Nurse, who was amazing, I thought the biggest mistake he made in that series was not playing Ibaka more. I just love what he does. And whether it's Denver, Golden State, I see Ibaka inserting himself into the playoff picture in a real way if he leaves Toronto.
So here's my Ibaka prediction, then I'll make the Ibaka prediction. I think the guy who goes from Toronto to a Golden State-like team in terms of just let me sacrifice money, minutes, role to try and win a championship is Gasol if he stays here in the U.S. I bet my prediction for Ibaka would be like a 1-year, $20 million deal from the Raptors. I think the Raptors run it back with Ibaka, run it back with Van Vliet in a contract that they can absorb. They can, like, that's acceptable to us. It's a okay number. It's a lot, but it's an okay number. Like 18 to 20, maybe, like Van Vliet's going to get paid. And I keep myself within a salary dump of Norman Powell or whatever of Giannis level cap space, and I maintain a good team for 2021. So that's I'm gonna call a 1-year balloon payment for Ibaka, similar to what the Heat will do with Dragic now, or what I think the Heat will do with Dragic. Now, all of that obviously goes out the window if Giannis signs the Supermax on the first day, and then you just stop planning to get Giannis. But if he doesn't, that's my Ibaka prediction. Because Ibaka was really good all year last year. Ibaka had a great season.
And the year before. So we think Dallas, Toronto, and Miami are the three teams to watch with Giannis, but not really I'm not reporting this. I'm just saying those seem like the three teams that are jockeying already.
I don't think that's a secret. I mean, I think that's all been publicly mentioned. I think those are the three, plus Milwaukee, obviously. I'm not sure that there's certainly, Golden State has gotten all the attention as a trade destination for Giannis. I think that's been overblown from the beginning.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Although I do think their package is like semi-competitive. I just don't see Milwaukee trading him. And then if they don't trade him there, I don't see Giannis necessarily putting them above those other three we mentioned. Maybe a shadow team comes out. Maybe another team emerges or whatever. But those are the three, yeah.
If they trade Giannis, it's got to be for like Embiid. You have to get a star back under a longer contract. Otherwise, you got to roll the dice. Hope you win the title and hope he stays. There's really, unfortunately for them, there's no way out.
Well, that's the way out. You win the title.
We don't think they're going to win the title.
It's presently constituted. I don't think they're going to win the title. Although next year has a chance. I mean, we could wrap it up saying this. Next year has a chance. I mean, rarely do we have all these good teams coming back and then poof, as if from thin air, without having to make any moves at all. Two teams emerge as potential deep threats in the playoffs in Golden State and Brooklyn. And, we can argue about Brooklyn. I know it's kind of chic to be down on Brooklyn. I think Brooklyn's going to be really good. Next year is it's loaded top to bottom. I think it has a chance to be a really fun season.
This is why I was so bummed out about the Celtics. Now, granted, I've had a lot of good fortune the last 20 years as a sports fan, but I really felt like the window for them, as weird as this sounds, was like, this is probably the best chance they're going to have over the next 3 years to win a title, just for the way the league shook out, because Milwaukee self-destructs, Clippers self-destruct, Brooklyn's not there yet, Golden State's not there yet, and it was just this straight line to like, wow, all right, let's get into a Lakers series, who the hell knows? And then Miami, that series, it's a haunting series, because you look at like that crazy hero 37-point game, those random quarters where like Iguodala's hitting 4 threes and Duncan Robinson with 5 threes. And just, if you really look closely at that game, it was just sitting there, not to mention they blow the first two.
I was going to say,
really badly.
It's the first two. It comes, if you're a Boston fan feeling regret, it's the first two games.
And I feel like the right team won. I'm not making excuses. Miami was tougher, and when push came to shove, they made all the plays. But man, that was sitting there for the Celtics,
Well, look, how many times have you be honest? How much Kemba Walker in the trade machine have you been doing?
None. I really like Kemba.
Okay.
And maybe too much. Hayward is the guy that I think they have to seriously wonder, is this just jinx from day one? When you have a guy who breaks his ankle and has one of the most horrifying injuries in the history of the league during the first half of his first game, and then since then has been snake bit left and right, and even like gets to the bubble, gets hurt in that first game, and it's just like, are we just better off moving on? For both sides, is it better for Hayward to move on? He's got all this baggage now with the Celts, and they really got to figure that part out.
Well, he's got 1 year left, assuming he opts in, and then can dictate his own future if he wants to. He's an interesting guy this summer. All right, Mr. Simmons, you got to go. Thank you, as always, for your time. People know where to find your podcast, the Bill Simmons Podcast, at theringer.com and Spotify. Who we got this week? You had what's the guy's name? Cooper Raiff?
Cooper Raiff, yeah.
So I watched that movie. I haven't even listened to your podcast. I watched that movie only because I saw it in the headline of your podcast, and I saw Fennessy tweeting loving words about it, and Fennessy is my go-to movie recommender.
He's good.
It's quite good. It was really a nice. It was spouse friendly. It was like a very good little Friday night.
My wife also loved it. It's a very good date movie. I'm really happy that during this podcast I finally broke you. And you people can't see the Zoom, but with the Embiid George thing, all the life sank out of your body, and you just started playing with your hair, and you just got upset. You were rattled. I felt it coming. 10 trades.
I was rattled. You hit me with you hit me with the left hook to the body that I wasn't expecting, and I just didn't know what to do.
I'm so ready for some sort of gigantic Embiid trade. I don't think they'll do it, but it's so much fun because He's a guy that if he got in shape could be one of the 3 best players in the league. So that's what you're trading away is the potential of that.
I feel like I'm going to be saying that in 2028.
That's
like,
the problem.
I'm going to be like 15 pounds heavier with less hair, and like, I'll be like, well, if he just got in shape,
right?
You know.
But remember, we were saying that about Shaq, and then he got in shape.
Prime Shaq was a monster. All right, go do your thing, Mr. Simmons. Thank
you
very much. Best to your
Thanks, Zach
family.
Lowe. Good to see you.
Have fun out in LA. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.